Dale. And we are live on YouTube, and I will now welcome our attendees. There's Dr. Crowell.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. We're just letting everybody in. Welcome. This is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. If that's what you're looking for, you found the right place. It takes a few minutes on Zoom to let people in, so please bear with us, but welcome. This is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. We're just letting people in. We are live on YouTube, and takes a few minutes for people to come in through the door, so please bear with us and welcome. We'll be starting in just a couple of minutes. We'll wait just one more minute and then we'll get started. Get started just about one more second. Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Losak. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. Welcome to our Renter Town Hall. We hold these Renter Town Halls approximately twice a month, as well as with individual apartment communities and community groups. Tonight is an opportunity for questions and concerns to be raised with the Health and Human Services, with the Department of Housing and Community Affairs. We'll be joined by the County Executive, Mark Elrich, in a few minutes. And we are also joined with some other senior panelists, which we will introduce in a moment. I would like to ask you if you have any questions or comments to please put them in the chat. We will be monitoring the chat and the questions that are brought in throughout the town hall and providing links to useful information. And as we go through our agenda, we will still be answering questions from previous subject matter. So please put your questions and concerns in the chat as we go. And so with that, let me just briefly introduce everybody. We have with us the Director of the Health and Human Services Department, Dr. Raymond Crowell. We have the Deputy Director of the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, Frank Demaray. We have the Manager of the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs, Rosie McCrae Moody. We have the Director of the SEF. It's the to prevent homelessness. I know the last part, but it is a program to prevent homelessness, and it is extremely important. Amanda Harris is with us, and we have the Special Assistant to the County Executive, Dale Tibbetts, and most important to me at this moment is the Chair of our Board of Directors and our Vice Chair of our Board of Directors, our Chair William Roberts and Vice Chair Chris Perry. And to give us some opening remarks, I'll now turn it to William Roberts. Will?
Thanks, Matt, and good to be with everyone, all of our guests, panelists, and everyone who's joining us in the Zoom room to have this conversation tonight. Hope everyone is doing well. But before we begin, just would love to acknowledge on the eve of Veterans Day, all the veterans that are with us, including our board colleague, Chris Perry there. Chris, thank you for the service that you do here locally, and thank you for your service to the nation. Veterans Day is always special for me personally. My late father is a Vietnam vet, and very proud of his service to the country. So for all the veterans and veteran-connected folks out there with us tonight, we thank you and your family for their service. Um, we as always, when we join to have these conversations, we are coming at pivotal points in what is a continuing of the eviction crisis and impacts from COVID-19 that are being felt nationally and here locally in the state and in the county. We know that as of now, there are estimated to be about 100,000 or so renters in Maryland that remain behind on their rent due to the impacts of the pandemic. And the estimates locally are about 15,000 of those, give or take, are renters here in Montgomery County facing arrears. And so the work that we are all here to talk about and that we're doing in the community remains paramount because although we hope that things are getting better in terms of the public health crisis that is COVID-19, we also know that the economic fallout that's being felt by many families continues. And we've seen from national reporting, certainly this week, about the sort of slow churn of the eviction crisis. For those of you who have heard us talk about this issue before and been paying attention, you know that there are lots of warnings at the beginning of the pandemic about this eviction tsunami that was to hit because of the various factors and pressure being built up, both with courts being closed, evictions being in the pipeline that were halted, but also people who were getting further and further behind on their rent. And so for some folks looking at the situation on the ground today versus what the predictions might have been, some people would say, oh, well, it's not nearly as bad as predicted. And those folks, I think, would be looking at the wrong indicators, because what we know is that this is still a crisis and a slow moving crisis that is still building. And so, we're hopeful nationally, but also here at the state and at the local level, the folks who are paying attention to that, we know our partners here are, to understand that this is still a very real crisis for so many people. And so that's why it was really important for us as an organization and also for us as a county to see the action that took place recently at the county council. And for a lot of folks here, hopefully, that for about a year now, since earlier in the pandemic, the county has been under a temporary emergency rent stabilization tied to the voluntary rent increase guidelines. You've heard us talk about this here before, hopefully. Well, that law that was passed about a year ago was set to expire. And the council had, for some weeks and months really, been debating whether or not been debating what to do about the law. Folks like us folks like the Renters Alliance were asking for a clean extension of the protections which were in place for every Montgomery County renter, because the pandemic is ongoing and still a crisis, but also because, as a matter of public policy, the simplest way we knew to maintain the protection for the most amount of people was to maintain it for everyone. And there was a debate on the council about how to potentially shrink that protection, means test it, target it. And very fortunately, both because of leadership from folks like Councilmember Jawando and the voice of the county executive, but also from grassroots leadership, like from us at the Renters Alliance and other partners, CASA, the More Network, etc., that law has been extended for 6 months from November 15th to May 15th, and the bill will continue to cap rent increases at what the voluntary rent increase guidelines, the VRGs, right now it's at 1.4%, and that'll be I think reevaluated, but that also had within that package a reform to how late fees are dealt with. And so, we think it's really important, right, as we're going to talk about the rent relief programs here tonight, that renters across the county maintain this sort of universal protection, because it is one of the last lifelines that folks have. We know, the journey we've been on with the protections at the state level, that all of us here, I think universally, we're calling for the state government and the governor, or hoping for the state government and the governor to continue protections for folks. And we know that the governor's orders, so-called moratoria, ended some time ago. And so, as the layers of protection, both, the federal eviction protection as well, were removed, it's really important that we have this local protection. So we're gratified that the council listened to the voices of renters, of advocates, of the folks at frankly, of the housing department, who were talking about how some of the machinations of some of the tweaks to the bill wouldn't be workable. So we're gratified that extension will go on for another 6 months. And as that happens, we're going to continue the work that we're doing here with our partners that is so critical. We continue, of course, as you all know, hopefully, Renters Alliance focuses on a direct advocacy and education for tenants. And as part of the work that we've been doing as a partner with the county, we continue to do our outreach on the risk of restitution list that we help to coordinate it with the county and the sheriff's office, and still showing that we need to continue to step up the pace of aid, so that we can get stuff out to folks who are across the spectrum, really the economic spectrum, and across the county, really feeling the impacts and getting hit hard by what's going on. And so I know we'll talk about that a little bit tonight, and probably hear from the county executive on that as well. But we're happy that you're with us, and get your good questions ready, but just wanted to update folks on where we are, and continue to be grateful to be able to do this work with you all.
Thanks, Will. County executive is on his way, I believe, but in the meantime, Dr. Crowell, Director of Health and Human Services, would you like to provide some overview remarks about your operation for everybody who knows the COVID rent relief program and homelessness prevention programs are run out of the Health and Human Services Department. So we have the two top people for that here right on our Renter Town Hall. Dr. Crowell, would you like to offer some remarks?
Sure. Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for inviting us to come and talk with you. Happy to be back with you again. And it's Amanda Harris is my chief for Services to End and Prevent Homelessness, or SEF for short. Just to be clear about that for folks, because I know it took me a while to get my head around that as well. Before we start talking about the topic of the evening, I wanted to just say thank you all thank you and echo Mr. Roberts' sentiments about Veterans Day and the veterans that have served with us and are maybe here on this call this evening. We appreciate, as ever, the service, and it's a moment to pause and say thank you again. I also want to say thank you to all of you who have gotten your booster shots, your third shots, taken your children or your grandchildren out to get them vaccinated, and to help us get around this last hurdle and this last corner in this pandemic. Or this next corner, I should say, and hopefully, if they haven't gone, please take them there and get them. Please nudge them out the door and get them there, so we can all draw a fresh breath of air at some point. Yeah, I think Amanda will do the details in terms of where we are tonight and the things that are going on with us. But we continue to try to drive forward as quickly as we can and as thoroughly as we can to try to make sure that the long-term impacts of the economic impacts of the pandemic don't result in people losing their homes and being evicted and having to go and find another place to live. Um, the funding is still available. We are planning on this and expect this is going to be a long-term operation for us. We know we have funding from the federal government through 2025, and we expect that we're going to be doing this kind of work for the next several years. We're also mindful of and tracking and working with the sheriff's office around evictions to make sure that anyone who's gotten a notice that we can intervene and work with the landlords and with the tenants to make sure that they don't lose their homes and that they have that if they assuming they have a COVID related if they have a COVID related arrearage, that we can help them to pay some of the arrearages and in some cases pay prospective rents to give them a little bit of a breather. You all know this, but I'm just repeating it for those who may have missed some of the details at some point. And I think the other thing for us is trying to find ways to speed up the process, to make sure that people are aware of the process and where they are. I've asked our IT department to generate an updated system that will provide updates to anyone who's given us an email or a text message or a text number that we can text them on. And I checked with them, this is Wednesday, I checked with them on Monday and they assured me that they were doing a soft launch and working on the system and that would be up and running shortly, hopefully in the next, if it's not today, then in the next couple of days, so that people do get some notice about where they are, and anytime there's a status change in their application. It's hard to be out there and having filed something and not know what the status is and not know what's going on, and we're trying to fix that for folks. So it doesn't. It may not speed things up, but it will at least let you know where you are and know that you haven't been forgotten in this process. So with that, I will stop for now and we'll let you go on with your agenda. And if we have, there's an opportunity, I'll be with you. So there's an opportunity to do some Q&A. Be happy to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Crowell. Amanda, do you want to take it from here? We may have to interrupt you if the county executive joins us, but we all know how to rock and roll on this call. So we'll turn it to you and take it away.
Sure. Understood. Thank you, Matt. Good evening, everyone. Again, Amanda Harris, Chief of Services to End and Prevent Homelessness. I also want to thank all the veterans for their service and their families. My father is also a Vietnam vet, so this is near and dear to my heart. So thank you all again. So I will start just an update on where we are as far as distributing the funds. So as of the end of last week, we had in total put out $52.7 million in direct assistance, and that has gone to 7,882 households. So that means that we have prevented almost 8,000 evictions in the county. We actually started doing rent relief back in May of 2020, so just 2 months after the pandemic started. Started out with $2 million that were appropriated by county council. Then the county and the county executive made a decision to allocate $20 million from the coronavirus relief funds for eviction prevention. So recognizing that there was a great need to support tenants and landlords in the community. So that money was not specifically slated by the federal government to be used for eviction prevention, but the county made that decision that this was important. So we've had various iterations of the program. We are currently in phase 3 of the COVID rent relief, and this money is federal money from the Department of Treasury. It's the Emergency Rental Assistance Program that has in fact been specifically allocated for eviction prevention. So we've spent $35 million in the ERAP so far, serving 3,386 households. There is more funding available. So in this current tranche, we have about $17 million left. to spend. And then we will be getting a second allocation directly from the Department of Treasury of another $34 million. And that's just our direct allocation. We will likely receive another 30 million from the state through their allocation from Treasury. So that's another almost $5 million that will be available to provide eviction prevention. Let's see. So let me talk a little bit about the eligibility criteria. So to be eligible for this program, you need to have been a resident in the county since August of 2020. You are income level, so you have to have an income at or below 50% area median income. That might not mean much to you. So as an example, for a one-person household, that's about $45,000 annually. For a four-person household, that's about $64,000. So if your income is less than that, then you would be eligible for this program. You must owe at least $1,000 in rent. So you must be behind, currently have arrears, and you must be able to demonstrate that you have a COVID financial hardship. So that could be you lost your job because of COVID. Maybe you contracted COVID and you for a period of time, so you have lost wages. It could be, unfortunately, that you lost a loved one or family member that was contributing financially due to COVID. That would count. Maybe you had to take time off because you had school-age children and they were in virtual school, and someone had to be home to ensure that they were being taken care of and that they were actually attending school. So there's a number of different ways that you could demonstrate COVID financial hardship, and both the financial hardship and the income can be documented through just a self-certification or a self-attestation. So you just need, there's some forms on the application and online that you complete and you sign verifying that the information is correct. The benefit for this program for households that are making between 31% and 50% AMI, the maximum benefit is $12,000. So we can pay up to $12,000 in arrears and also 3 months of future rent, but the max benefit is $12,000. If you are extremely low income and you have an income that is below 30% AMI, which for a one-person household is $27,000, and for a four-person household, that's about $39,000. There is no cap on the dollar amount. So if you are currently in your arrears are $15,000, you could be eligible for the full arrears. There is a cap on the number of months of assistance that we can provide. So the Treasury only allows us to pay 12 months of arrears and then 3 months of prospective. So there is some caps, but you should still apply even if you owe more than $12,000 because assistance may be available to you. If you do receive more than $12,000, we do require the landlord to agree to certain concessions. So the landlord must agree to write off 10% of your arrears. They also must agree to halt any eviction proceedings, and they cannot evict for at least 30 days after the benefit ends. So if you get 3 months of future rent, they cannot file for eviction again for at least 30 days after that. You also, if your lease is ending and you receive the benefit and it's more than $12,000, your landlord must agree to renew your lease for at least 90 days. We know that even when there was eviction protections, that many landlords were able to use the tenant holding over loophole. So they could simply choose to not renew your lease. They didn't have to have any reason, and there was no protections for you. So in this program, if the landlord is going to receive a significant amount to cover those arrears, they need to actually renew your lease for at least 90 days. So that's the basics about the eligibility and the benefits. We are working as quickly as we can to process the applications. I know It is not as fast as people would like, and we do recognize that there are a number of households that have applied several months ago and are still waiting to get assistance. As Dr. Kroll said, we are working on improving our communication to let people know that we're still aware that you're there. You're still in the queue. We're still going to process your application. We have a number of ways that we prioritize applications, and some of those are required by the state. Some of those priorities are required by the Department of Treasury, and some are our local priorities. So if you are living in our designated high need census tracts, you are given priority. If you have been unemployed for more than 90 days, you are also given priority. If you have a scheduled court date for eviction, or you have actually a scheduled eviction, we absolutely prioritize those cases, particularly those with a scheduled eviction. We are running out of time in those cases, so we immediately pull the application and we can process that within a week to make sure that you do not lose your home. So the way we are doing case assignments right now, so about 60% of the cases that are assigned each week are coming from those priority groups. And then the other 40% don't have to meet any of the priority criteria. So even if you are not in those priorities, you still will get processed. Right now, we're focusing on small private landlords and people that have applied earlier. So going from the length of time of the application has been sitting. So trying to make sure that we get to those people that have been waiting for many months. Let's see what else. For those that do not qualify, so if you do not have a COVID financial hardship, or perhaps your over income, there are other programs that are available within Services to End and Prevent Homelessness. So we have utility assistance. We can pay for rent arrears. We can also pay for relocation. So if you choose to move, we can pay first month's rent and security deposit. To be eligible for that, you have to have an income at or below 60% AMI, which I don't actually have that calculation in front of me. I don't know how much that is in dollars, but maybe Rosie or somebody else can help me get that. And you also, for that program, you do in fact have to have a utility shut off, or you have to have a judgment against you. So you need to have gone to court, or the court has issued a judgment against you. So you are at imminent risk of being evicted. What else can I say? We really try to work with households to ensure that they can meet the eligibility criteria. So in particular, we look at income in a number of different ways. So you can provide your income for the last 30 days, or we can look at the last year, because we do know and recognize that some people may have been out of work for a period of time. Maybe they were out of work for 6 months, but have since started working again, and maybe their income is more than 50% AMI, but they still have huge arrears because they were out of work for 6 months. We would look at the last 12 months. And since you didn't work for 6 of those, you would likely meet the income eligibility. The last thing I will say, I did mention earlier that there is a second tranche of funding coming, the ERA 2, that we have not worked out the details about the specific eligibility criteria for that. We are reviewing what has been working and what hasn't worked so well with the current program, making some adjustments, and we hope to be able to roll that out sometime in the new year. The other thing, I think there was one other thing I wanted to mention. Some of you, there has been some questions about, if I already received assistance, can I apply again? That's kind of complicated, and it depends on when you received assistance. So if you applied very early on and you received money from either local funding or from that 20 million of the CRF, So if you applied prior to July of 2021, you may be eligible for additional funding. If you have applied and received funding after July 2021, at this point, we are not providing any additional assistance, but you may be eligible for money after the new year when we get the second tranche of funding.
So thank you, Amanda. A couple things. One of the things that the Renters Alliance has been concerned about, and obviously we hear from many, many tenants, is that they applied 4 months ago when they weren't in crisis, but now they're marching towards more serious circumstances. Now, you've said, and your staff has said, that they should contact you to alert you as they escalate in crisis. So when first you might be behind in your rent, then you might receive a notice to vacate or a threatening letter from your landlord or property manager. Then you might receive now, which is required, and Rose McCray Moody will get into this later, a notice from the court that says in 10 days we intend to file against you. Then you will receive a court notice that says we intend to evict you. Your court date is the following. You should go to court. And on that day, if you're still behind, there'll likely be a judgment against you for failure to pay rent. And then the landlord will have to file for a writ of restitution. It's a perfunctory form. And then that goes on a list that gets sent to the sheriff's department to schedule an eviction. HHS needs to know when you've gotten into more serious difficulties in order to prioritize your application. But Amanda, we're seeing some people who have been trying to communicate that and been frustrating. You want to address that? Or Dr. Crowell?
Sure, I can address that. So you can notify us by emailing us at hss@montgomerycountymd.gov. You can call 311. You can, if you have been assigned a caseworker, the best thing to do is to reach out directly to your caseworker. You can also, through the online application, there is a need to reach us button and you can communicate there. What I will tell you is we are only prioritizing applications once you have actually received the court notice. So getting a threatening letter from your landlord, getting the notification from your landlord that they intend to file would not bump you up to the top of the list. You actually do have to have a court notice. It's at that point that we would pull it for processing. I think that answered your question.
And I'll say, the Renters Alliance is an independent nonprofit, and we work in collaboration with, and sometimes in opposition to, but certainly in collaboration with all of these departments, with an intention of ensuring that renters get the resources and support that they're entitled to. So if what Amanda is describing to you is not working, and you can't get through and you're feeling like you're in crisis, let us help you. Let us provide counseling to you. We know how the system works. We know what they can do. We know what they can't do, and we can help guide you to that. So I'll put our email in the chat if you haven't emailed us before, and we'll help you distinguish between what feels like a crisis and what is a real crisis. Some people get worried that they get a notice to vacate. They have to be out in 3 days. You don't. And we will help you and work with the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs on those kinds of threats and situations.
Matt?
So, yes, Dr. Crowell.
Matt, just wanted to say two things. One is that I corrected the email that you put in there. It's HHS, not HSS, because I have no idea. What's that?
Sorry, it is actually HSS.
It's HSS?
Right, and everybody says the same thing, Dr. Crowell. You're not alone. It doesn't make any sense, but that's what we've been promoting. You're not alone.
Okay, HSS, stand corrected. That's bizarre. I'll get the story on that later. But the other thing is that I appreciate what you just said, Matt, about the when it constitutes a crisis and along the process, because there are many steps along the process before you actually end up having being at risk for truly being evicted. And the challenge for us is that there are 13,000 petitions that get filed every year. We can't possibly respond to all of those. and most of those hopefully will resolve themselves. Many of them will resolve themselves. It's when we get to the point where we're facing something with the courts and the judgment and the sheriff's offices and writs that we know that there's still a point and still a time to intervene and to help people. And that is a piece that Amanda and her team have been working to make sure happens.
Yeah, and we're part of a partner with that. We were able to coordinate that program with your department and with DHCA and with the Sheriff's Department to get those lists. Unfortunately, what we're finding is that by the time we get to these people at the end of this process, they've either self-evicted and moved out already, or they have actually been evicted. And so, but it is the best effort we can do for people at the end of this crisis spectrum. So we're on top of that. Is that the county executive, Dale, or is it just a mirage? No, it's the real deal. Will Roberts, do you want to welcome our county executive?
Certainly. Welcome. Folks want to welcome County Executive Mark Elrich to the conversation. Good to see you, sir. And appreciate you making the time tonight to talk about this really important issue. And so want to turn the floor over to you now. You want to make some comments?
Yeah. So I am sitting on a meeting. I'm supposed to be testifying on the state transportation priorities, so I'm kind of keeping an eye on that in another window. But I've got probably maybe 5-10 minutes to chat real quickly. First thing, thanks for having me here. And I'm, continue to be really concerned about where we are in terms of affordable housing, on multiple levels. I saw a question about homelessness, and I'd say the one bright spot, or the brightest spot, is that we will be opening up a 200-bed homeless shelter complete with food, beds, and services. So we will not have to put these people back on the street. And one of the things that's exciting to me is that we will virtually have enough beds for everybody right now who's out there experiencing homelessness, who wants to come in. There are always going to be some people who just flat out refuse to come in. But we think we're going to be in a position where we're actually able to address the needs of most people who are homeless. And in the last year, our folks were able to get 800 people who were homeless and get them into permanent housing. So that's a victory of sorts. And if we can have permanent shelters and no longer put people outdoors, 8 months a year has been our practice. I think that'll be a significant step forward, and frankly, something that everybody should be proud of. I always thought it was morally embarrassing that the county's policy was that so many people had to sleep outdoors so long, and this will change that. And so I'm excited about that. We continue to work, and Raymond's. I haven't heard what he said so far, but our departments are continuing to get money out, and we'll continue to get money out. We have additional funds so that when we go through what we already have, that doesn't mean we won't be able to add to it. And so I think we've got a ways to go in terms of getting our funding out into people who need it in the community. And we are going to continue those efforts. It's not a fast process. A lot of it is folks lose time processing applications because we get a lot of incomplete applications, and that just ties down processors. But we have to do better as well. I'm not content with where we are in terms of speed, and we're going to continue to look at speeding up what we do. I will say, and this is a bit ironic, the faster we go, the sooner we run out of money, because it does not appear that, given what we think we know about the need, it doesn't appear that we're going to have the funds to address the entire need that's out there right now. That's been true from the beginning. So we will continue to get as much as we can do. And we're going to work with you and with landlords to make sure that we're able to speed these processes up a little bit. In the long term, we were able to extend rent control for 6 months in a more limited version. And frankly, it's not long enough. And we need a council that's willing to actually entertain serious rent stabilization for the long term. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the projections that have come from both park and planning and other folks who did consulting for park and planning. But one of the most alarming things is that of the 40,000 households they project coming to Montgomery County over the next decade, almost 3/4 of them would require subsidy. About a third of that group would require subsidy at the MPDU level, and about 2/3 of that group would require subsidies below 50% of area median income. That's a lot of people requiring a lot of subsidy, and it doesn't address the 20,000 households living here today who are spending 60% of their income finding housing because their incomes are down around 30% of area median, which is about $32,000. So we continue not to have a plan for that. And I'm a bit upset that the council and the Thrive proposal pretty much focus on market rate housing and seem to foster the notion that if we build more market rate housing, the existing housing will become less expensive. That's a fantasy. And if it became less expensive, it would be over decades and decades. And with the need we have is right now. The 20,000 households who are living where they are don't have decades to find housing. And the people who are going to be coming here in the next 10 years are also going to need that housing. So we need to think about more creative ways of getting housing. I've had conversations with developers about changing some of the way we approach development and how we tax it, with the goal of getting actually more money than we get today, but getting it in a different way than we've been taking it. And I think that route has some promise. Optimistic that we will have the opportunity to move forward. But it's not a panacea, and it's not going to solve everything. Your work is important. You need, I feel, continue to raise not just the short-term issues, because the pandemic will more or less, recede at some point, but the long-term issues of at what point does the county make the investments or develop the willpower to require people to provide adequate amounts of affordable housing when we're approving new developments. Now, hold on one second. I want to make sure they're not asking me to join them.
So let me find my page. Sorry about that.
Okay, somebody else is talking.
So, Mr. County Executive, at risk
Yes.
of you missing an agreement to expand the Beltway while you're gone from this other meeting, we appreciate the work on the homelessness issue. But for those of us who are working with renters who are still housed but facing eviction, our concerns are with the several 100,000 Montgomery residents who rent their homes who feel unstable year to year. One of the things that has come up repeatedly in the rent stabilization argument was that it would drive landlords and large corporations out of business, and they would move out of town. Are you or your departments aware of any landlords who have left town in the last 18 months?
I'm not only not aware of that, but I live in Tacoma Park, and we've had rent stabilization here for probably 30 years, and we still have landlords, amazingly, and some of them do quite well. And we know that landlords have actually spent a lot of money to acquire buildings in Tacoma Park at times. So it's not the case. When we wrote our law in a way that a landlord could cover capital improvements, and if they acquired a building, they could know from the beginning how much of a capital improvement they could get based on the work they were planning on doing. And so we were able to create a situation where people didn't buy buildings and then get suddenly surprised by the repairs and that they wouldn't be able to get increases to cover the repairs. We, innovatively, as we tried to do in Tacoma Park, required that the increases be spread over time, because you amortize, your investment over time. And so we were able to go with smaller rent increases over longer periods of time in order to cover the costs. So I think the objections they have, we can actually address. So, it doesn't create a lifetime tenancy, nor does what do we call it? Eliminating creating just cause eviction, not allowing people to be evicted without actual causes. So we think we can do those things and do them in a way that's going to protect the property owners. We're not looking at putting rent stabilization. I wouldn't recommend it on the new buildings because new buildings are coming with MPDUs. Many of the older ones did not. The rents in these buildings are obscene to start with, as you can look at what's going on in Bethesda. So I actually think that's kind of a bogus argument. And
Yeah, so do we. We were just being facetious. Will, did you have a question?
Yeah, can I go while we have you before we leave you county executive? Can I go back to appreciate your comments, and you mentioned definitely taking a look. We were talking before you got on at the speed of rental assistance and getting that out, and I know we've been having conversations with both us and other advocates with the administration throughout the pandemic about the sort of crisis footing that the county is on in terms of focusing resources on not just churning out the rent relief dollars, but also trying to set up an apparatus, be that some kind of eviction crisis task force or some other where organizations like ours can be partnered with folks like Amanda and her team, but other additional staff perhaps that could help to buttress the operation. I mean, we just frankly we understand sort of the math of given the size and scope of some of the teams and departments in HHS and DHC before the pandemic, plus a pandemic hitting, plus all this federal funding coming that needs to get out the door. We know certainly that the county government wasn't built for the job that it's been doing for the past 19-20 months. But as you mentioned, going forward, but also with this new tranche of money Amanda was talking about earlier before you got on, I know a lot of folks, including us, are wondering what kind of plans there are in place to help supplement teams like Amanda's and others to help sort of spread that load and get that money out the door, but also knowing that this isn't Amanda's only job, right? So and folks like her. So I'm just wondering what plans are. You could talk to us about that.
Look, I thought the most effective thing was a proposal that the nonprofits made, which was that if our people had came across applications that were incomplete, that they would hunt down the tenants and collect the information rather than having the processor do that. We have not implemented that. I'm hopeful that we implement it very quickly. But as of Thursday, when I talked to the nonprofits, it still hadn't happened. That's an easy way to expand our reach and get these applications completed sooner rather than later. And so that's important to me.
County Executive Elrich, I think the nonprofits you're talking about are like MHP and the other nonprofit housing providers. If you might consider including the Renters Alliance, HIP, LEDC, CASA, and others to go after those who are in the commercial properties to do the same, we would be pleased to add that to our tasks, even though we are pressed, but that would also expand the impact.
That's a good idea, and we can talk about that. There's no reason why you couldn't go into the buildings like everybody else is and actually, if assuming the landlords put you in touch with the tenants, provide the ability to reach out to a tenant and talk to them. Let me check where they are in this meeting right now.
Chimes in. Hear you loud and clear, Mr. Chairman. Glad to see everybody tonight. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, I got 5 minutes.
Inviting me to speak tonight on behalf of the
minutes.
council members. I know council member.
So that's one thing that I think we could do. And Raymond's on this call. We could figure out some systematic way to extend this to other people doing this work, obviously. But you're going to run into the same problem. I will process them faster and the money will be gone faster. One thing we've been trying to do which is why not everybody gets processed in line, is that we've been processing the evictions that come through. And if we stuck strictly to who is in line to get processed, then the eviction actions at the court wouldn't get caught. And so our people are getting this weekly list from the sheriff about which people are facing evictions, and then they're contacting these people and trying to get them to come back and fill out, come in, fill out the forms, or complete the forms online so they can submit for protection. They're calling the landlords, letting them know that we've reached the person who has an eviction action, and they're assuring the landlords that we'll process them and they'll be able to get the rent. That's taking time and effort. It's also taking people out of sequence, but these are the people immediately facing eviction pressures. The numbers are lower than I imagined. They have been in the teens and in the 20s so far, as opposed to this huge tsunami. This is sort of like akin to, I don't know, raising the temperature in a pot of boiling water on a frog slowly. You don't boil them at once, but you raise the temperature unsafely over a period of time.
But the misnomer is the safely, Mr. Elrich. I believe eventually the frog does cook.
I believe that's true, but it's not as stressful in the beginning, apparently, because he doesn't know he's being boiled. But in any case, I mean, I think the decision to work with the sheriffs and be able to work on these lists is really important, because these are the folks who, in an immediacy, they're not in chronological order of how they submitted applications to us. They're in chronological order in terms of when the cases were filed. And I think our intervention there is important.
We were happy to coordinate that intervention. As I was discussed earlier, it is critical, but it is also our experience and the experience of our partners that we are arriving at doors of people on these writ lists who have already moved out. And usually because they've self-evicted, the apartment is empty. In one case, we had somebody who was panic-stricken about being evicted and found out it was not her, it was the people who had moved out a couple of weeks before. So it is at the end of the eviction crisis continuum. And so we do need to do it. But again, we are just urging early, before they get into crisis, if there's any way to adjust the program to burn this candle at both ends.
Well, I feel like we're burning it at both ends. It matters whether we can turn up more heat on the front end. And if you all can help, and if our department can accommodate this, I think we could actually accomplish a little bit more. This all comes down to how fast the applications get processed. And it's unfortunate that people didn't submit their applications completely, because that's really complicated things for us. But we didn't have people on site at the point of submission. So a lot of times they are what they are. Even with the ones where the nonprofits help people submit, we're still apparently finding some problems.
Well, thank you, Mr. County Executive, for joining. Dr. Crowley, did you want to say something?
No, go ahead. Come in.
Well, thank you, Mr. County Executive, County Executive Elrich, for joining us. We know your time is split between multiple tasks, as we would expect of a county executive. And we do hope that the Beltway is not being expanded because your attendance here. But thank you very much. We have a number of things on our agenda still. Is there any final remarks before you go?
We're all going to have to persist. And what I'd like to do, and I've offered this to some other groups, is do a deep dive into what's being proposed for housing in Montgomery County by Thrive, so people understand what they're going to get, and more importantly, what they're not going to get. Unless you believe in the Koch brothers, what they're doing is not terribly going to work very well.
Well, the conversation continues, as does public education, on the issues surrounding stable, quality, affordable rental housing. So we thank you for your participation. And we will eagerly follow your policy directives as they go. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. With that, we are now, we will continue to answer questions in the chat. And we will move to the Deputy Director of Housing, Frank Demarais, to get into some of these issues involving the current law changes and renters' rights and other concerns about code enforcement. Frank Demarais, take it over.
Thank you, Matt. And I always like to start with thanking everyone that's participating in this town hall, and to ask you, as you learn and get information, share this information as broadly as you can. Our biggest challenge is reaching as many renters as possible. And so in your community, your building, and your network, please help us broaden this work. So at Department of Housing Community Affairs, we have a very broad set of responsibilities to support our tenant community and landlord community. And the focus is on connecting people with information and resources. The department has been open to the public since June 7. Our teams are available. And so everything you hear tonight, people are available, whether they're in the office or teleworking, but you do have support available. You'll hear tonight from Rosie McCrae Moody at our Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs, which is a team focused on supporting tenants and landlords. And we'll be talking about some recent changes, but also the broad level of support across all of the laws and requirements. And Keen Nichols from our Code Enforcement Division is with us to summarize the approaches that we take to housing code enforcement. But there have been some very recent changes. Just yesterday, County Executive signed a law that Rosie will address. This is part of getting our economy and our properties through this current phase. We know it's a phase of the COVID economy and COVID impact, but we're taking this stage at a time and very focused on the fact that this is, as was said earlier, a very long process, and we're very committed to bringing as much information as possible to folks to connect them with their rights, free legal assistance, and the tenant support from the county and from Renters Alliance and other organizations. So with that, I'll introduce Rosie, because this is an important recent change that you need to understand and help others understand. Thank you.
Hello, this is Rosie McCrae Moody, manager of the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs. And our mission is to provide landlords and tenants with their rights and educate them about the law and give advice and direct them to where they need to go for tenants for help with paying rent or with the court or whatever. And landlords just to answer their questions and tell them what they can and cannot do. And you can file a complaint with us and we will try to mediate it so that you won't end up in district court. And tonight I have a brief PowerPoint which goes over some of the new laws that would have been referred to this evening. So cross your fingers and hope I can do this. Okay. And there it is. Can you see that?
Not yet. Amanda, you might have to give your tutoring again.
What happens?
Go to share screen.
Okay, hold on.
And then click on the tab that says PowerPoint.
That's what's not showing up here. The tab that says PowerPoint.
What happens when you click share screen?
The thing pops, it's the PowerPoint that I don't see.
Oh, did you close it on your computer?
I must have.
Okay.
Okay, so let me try it again.
We're in Zoom world.
Well, I told you I might not be able to do it.
Worked fine before. We're just building suspense.
You did such a good job on the practice round.
And if for any reason, Rosie, you can't pull it up, you can just go and discuss it and go through the slides yourself. I'm sure that's
I
fine.
can't, and you can't, I can't get it. I mean, I can see it, but I don't. It's open share. Okay. I'm sorry.
It's all right. If you need to, just go to the slides yourself and just talk your way through.
It's kind of useless, but anyway.
I will make an attempt with the draft I have, Rosie, and hopefully this will work.
Frank, I'll make you a co-host.
It's frustrating.
Okay. And there it is.
Okay, that's not the right one, but okay. I'm gonna go with mine, if I can find it.
Is what Frank has up the wrong slide?
I've amended it, so it's not, I'm not looking at what I need to.
Okay. Is that you, Rosie?
Yeah, that's me.
There you go. It's working now. Just find it. There it is.
That it? Yay!
Bravo.
Thank you, Frank. I don't know what you did, but thank you. All right. This form that says notice of intent to file a complaint for a summary rejectment. We've been getting a lot of calls because it's freaking people out. This is not an eviction notice. What it is that the law changed on October 1st. The state passed a law that says every tenant is entitled to legal representation. Every low-income tenant is entitled to legal representation when they're sued for failure to pay rent. And toward that end, they have forced the landlord to send, if they want to sue you for rent, they have to send this notice. So they're not sending it to intimidate you. They're not sending it to threaten you. They're required by law to send it. And basically it's a warning. It's a 10-day notice that says, if you don't pay me within 10 days of receipt of this notice, then I'm going to take you to court and sue you for failure to pay rent. So don't let them give you the notice and saying, if you haven't paid, you have to get out in 10 days. That's not true. All it is a warning. But what it also has on it, it has on the back part, it has legal places you can call. It has numbers for legal representation. So you can call legal aid. You can call the help center at the district court. They have attorneys that can speak to you. And it has the homeless representation projects number on the back now as well. So they have on their information where you can seek legal counsel if you need it. And what it also tells you is the date the notice is delivered, a description of what it has to tell exactly what you owe, what months they're suing you for. It has to tell you that you have rights, and it has to tell you that if you question the debt, they are obligated by law to give you a copy of the ledger or whatever it is they're basing it on. And it has the contact information, like I said, for nonprofit legal services on the back. So don't get scared because it says notice of intent to file summary rejectment. Actually read the form because it has a lot of information on it that's beneficial to you. And like I said, it was required by law. And these are the numbers that are on there. Maryland Legal Aid. You can call the Homeless Prevention Project. You can also call CASA. That's not on the form, but you can still call them. They have attorneys as well. And the Maryland Court Help Center, that number's there too. So all of these places have attorneys that you can speak with if you're sued for failure to pay rent to help you either form a defense or tell you exactly what your rights are. And they'll always tell you, go to court. Now, the new law about rent control. As you know, right now, the landlord can't raise your rent more than 1.4%, which is the voluntary rent guideline. As of yesterday, that law was extended for another 6 months. So until May the 15th, 2022, the landlord cannot raise your rent higher than the voluntary rent guideline. Currently, it's 1.4%, and it'll be amended in February because it's adjusted every year. So it may go up, it may go down, but the landlord cannot raise it more than the voluntary rent guideline. And the
Rosie,
law
can I
also
just-
said,
Rosie, can I just throw in a couple of important points about that? 1.4% increase is a very modest increase. If you are receiving a renewal notice, it should also include a 2-year lease option. If you're intending to stay in your building for any length of time, whether it's your permanent home, you're a long-term tenant, it is not likely you're going to see these kinds of stable rents unless they pass rent stabilization permanently when this bill expires. So I'm urging, the Renters Alliance is urging you to take advantage of the stabilized rents while they exist. And if you are seeing rents in a renewal notice during this period that is above that, please let us know and let the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs know. Thanks, Rosie.
mm-hmm. Okay, and it limits increases to the voluntary rent guideline, and there's a attestation form that you can sign that says you make 50% or less of the average median income for Montgomery County, or you've had a COVID impact, which has lowered your income. And that either applies to, and you can prove that by your 2020 taxes or your current rent. But the landlord can't question it. If you sign the attestation form and turn it in, the landlord has to go with it. And that's the form. That's a statement of eligibility for waiver of late fees. And basically what you're saying in this form is that you make 50% or less of AMI and that you've been affected by COVID in some way. And the chart which shows what your income range is on the back of the form. So I know it's a little small, but it's there. And the link to it is in this PowerPoint. And I sent it to Matt so he can put it on and we're going to put it on our website, and Matt will have it to list as well.
Right. Rosie, does a renter have to have applied for the rent relief program to utilize this provision?
No, they're not connected. But what it says is, if you get this form from if the landlord gives you a notice of rent increase, or he's going to sue you, he has to give you this form. So give you the chance to waive any late fees that you owe back to March 2020 up to now, through May the 15th, 2022, that have not been paid yet. If they've already been paid, then they've just already been paid. You're not going to get reimbursed. But if they haven't been paid yet, he has to waive them if you turn in this form.
And legal late fees on rents are 5% of rent or less. Is that correct, Rosie?
Yes. And lastly, the window guard bill, which goes into effect January 1st, 2022, requires that all landlords in multifamily buildings place window guards at all openable windows above the ground floor if you have children age 11 or less, or on request. So if you just ask for one, if you want one, you can get it. It must be installed at the landlord's expense, and there's a window guard addendum that goes with it, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. And this information must be included in every lease. And if there's any problem with the device, you must tell the landlord right away. He's obligated to fix it, but he can't fix it if he doesn't know. So if anything goes wrong, tell him right away and he'll fix it. And there's more information at our website, and that's the link. And this is the window guard addendum. So if you have children, you have to have window guards. And even if you don't have children, if you feel more secure with it in your window, you can tell the landlord and he can put it in for you. And so that's just a brief update of what's going on right now. And that's pretty much all for me. And again, if you're sued, go to court. And there is help for you. So please use the resources that are there.
Yeah, let me complement that summary with we put it in the chat, and I'll restate it here. We have a general renters information web page, and it's montgomerycountymd.gov/renters. / is the rightward leaning /. We also have a web page for landlords with similar information, but everything Rosie just reviewed, and I've put this in the chat, but it's at the montgomerycountymd.gov /renters, or you just go to the general Montgomery County website and put in renters, and it should take you to that webpage. It'll have drop-down boxes or drop-down tabs for the new law on the fee waiver, and the form that you need to sign and deliver to your landlord. Landlord has to provide that form to a tenant before they charge a late fee. You have to certify and attest that you are income eligible and that you've had a COVID impact and you've been a resident of the county since August of 2020. But it's very important to understand that, as well as this new notice that you'll be getting if you have any late payment. Even if you're only 1 or 2 days late, the landlord can, and in some buildings, they decide that it's actually, they believe required, that they send you a notice, the 10-day notice, that if you do not bring your rent current in 10 days, they intend to file a complaint. They may or may not, but tenants are receiving these notices, which do include information about applying for rental assistance. And there's information links to get through the state system to get to the Montgomery County rental assistance. And there's lists of the attorneys that we're talking about, free legal assistance to help you understand and navigate that process. So that information is there. We have with us one of our managers in our housing code section. We've had some questions in the chat around housing code process for addressing issues, and ask if Keene Nichols, if you can just bring folks up to date on the process for connecting with the county and how we perform our activities on the regular and the requested code inspections.
Great, thank you, Frank. As Frank indicated, my name is Keene Nichols. I'm with the Department of Housing and Community Affairs and the Code Enforcement section. So I supervise the team of inspectors that go around and do the mandated inspections of the apartment complexes throughout the county. There's close to 70,000 units throughout the county. We inspect these on a triennial basis, a biennial basis, or every year based upon if they are a troubled property or not. As you are probably aware of, with COVID, everything slowed down. And there was a period of time when we were just handling our complaints remotely through video and photographic technology. We've actually since probably July, I think it was, when we started re-entering units. We're now in full swing back at inspecting buildings, doing our 100% inspections, of course, on troubled properties and 25% inspections on other ones that are deemed compliant. As you can imagine, we've got quite a backload of apartments to inspect. What we've also been experiencing is that because people didn't have us in their homes so much and they weren't wanting to call, now that COVID is not as big of a concern anymore, we're getting a lot more calls too. So there's folks that call in our office. We encourage you to continue to call. The quickest, easiest way. Someone asked for my contact. I went ahead and shared it. And if you got something specific that you want to talk with me, by all means, reach out. But if you're going to make a complaint, the fastest and easiest way for that to happen is to call 311. That automatically, and we track this stuff, rigorously, gets assigned, a case started and assigned to an inspector. Inspector, depending upon the level of severity of violation, will call either that day, the next day, or if it's not that severe, within 5 days. So we'll get out to the, respond to the complaint, usually making a phone call to the tenant to, confirm whether the violation still exists and what exactly is going on, what efforts have been made to reach out to the property manager or owner. And then we would follow up, do an inspection, and or immediately sometimes contact the property owner manager to get them started on fixing the issue. I would say, as far as things that we're looking at right now, folks this time of year, and some are dealing with it right now because it's unseasonably warm weather that we're dealing with. We had a new law that's been in effect for about a year and a half now, with the AC. There's some tenants that are calling and saying like, well, what about my AC? Well, unfortunately, the prescribed period, through September has ended, and we've had some warm days, and a lot of these buildings, they operate on a system where they have to be switched over from air to heat, and you don't have the flexibility, unfortunately. I know in my apartment, I'm one of those older buildings where it's kind of hot right now. I got to open the window because, unfortunately, they've switched over. So it's something that we're still getting calls on. This time of year, it happens, and unfortunately, it's not so hot that they have to provide air. And even if it was warm, like I said, unfortunately, that's only in that window of time, through the summer months. I think that's about it. Else, you mentioned, Frank, that there might be some questions. I was looking through the chat. I didn't see anything specific.
What is always helpful for you and for Rosie to address for the audience is what you cover and what Rosie covers and what the distinction between your departments are. What are some typical examples of why people would call code as opposed to calling the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs? Okay.
So if anything is wrong with the physical space of the apartment due to a deferred maintenance or something breaking, so you've got, a pipe leak, lights don't work, you've got infestation with vermin or bugs, you've got some physical thing that's happening in the apartment that's broken, that needs to be repaired, you call code. You would call landlord tenant affairs if there's something, with your lease, some negotiations that you've had to work out, some way in which you feel like you're not being treated fairly in regards to your tenant rights as a renter and provisions that might be in your lease. We, code enforcement, handle anything in the physical space that's broken. Call us.
One other thing, Keen, is that now that you all are coming out of the COVID restrictions on going into apartments, can you explain that the basic requirements of all apartment communities to receive annual or triannual inspections, the difference between those that receive partial inspections, between 100% inspections, and then, of course, the specificity that does not is not mutually exclusive to addressing individual complaints? Unless you don't want to, because you're on mute. Tonight's our tech challenges. We're giving an award out. So far, it's going to Rosie. But if we could get Keen to address this. And if not, Frank, it's going to have to be you.
Okay.
Can't hear either of you guys.
Just back up to the question is, restate the question, Matt, because you're just talking about process to get connected.
Just so people understand how code functions.
Yeah,
There's two streams of activity. One is individual complaints, and the other is an ongoing program of community inspections of various levels.
Yeah, and just so as was mentioned, and we do want to keep repeating this, which is the 311 process for registering it, call it a complaint or a service request. It's very important that we get the details of the issue, identify the specifics, and then we can be much more responsive, make sure it gets to the right resource. So to call 311 or to go through the online 311 process to register a specific issue in your unit or in your building, and the code process will take that service request. It's tracked, and it does have a required turnaround time and responsiveness. So that's the best way to get things addressed that you see. We have implemented about 3 years ago a very broad review, went through most of the buildings in the county on a very high number of units, and identified buildings that had significant numbers of violations or issues. And buildings were graded into different categories. And the buildings with the highest number of violations are now on a system of being reviewed at a very high number of units. If you're in one of these buildings, you will get requests to have access to your unit to come in and just inspect units on a schedule that's annual. Now that we're out of the COVID limitations on entering properties, we had about a year plus of not entering units other than for very specific health and safety issues to protect tenants and staff from the continuing spreading. But now we're back to catching up on the annual, and then every other year, and then every 3 years. So the buildings that have fewer historical or severe violations are inspected on a different cycle than those that have the most severe. So it's a concerted effort to stay on top of things, not wait for the reports when we have buildings that have a continuing history of challenge and violations. And I think that addresses a little bit. There was in the chat on the Enclave building and other buildings that are on our priority list, distressed, and we have to be very active in those buildings.
I would like to say also on the issue of 311, when you call in, it's important to make sure that you get a case number. This is a large bureaucracy. There are, HHS was saying to me last week that they receive on an annual basis something like 200,000 requests for service. Thousands of requests for service makes for a large process. And so don't get lost in it. Whenever I call the cable company, and as I make this joke all the time, I have to take 2 aspirin and a scotch before I do it. And I have a graduate degree and I'm used to dealing with bureaucracies, but it's a challenge. One of the things is that if you call in and you have a complaint, you want to make sure that people are accountable for it. The 311 system was created in part to create accountability that way. And they will give you, and Keen or Frank or Rosie, correct me if I'm wrong, but they will give you a case number. And hopefully the 311 operator will not try to be the investigator him or herself, but will turn you to an investigator who is an expert to deal with the issue. And then you should get the name of that investigator and ask your questions, find out when they're coming out, find out if you have a case, find out if you've followed the process. One thing we didn't say also, which is obvious to some of us, but don't call landlord tenant and don't call code enforcement until you've called your property manager or landlord first. Let them have an opportunity to fix it or address it. These enforcement mechanisms are there when the property manager or the landlord is not responsive to you. Then we want to see it escalated appropriately. You can also call us or contact us, and we will address and guide you and counsel you. We have a lot of experience with a lot of properties, and we've seen how things work and how they don't work, and we can also provide you with expert advice.
I'm back, Matt. I don't know why my mouse just
did we answer what you would have said, or is there anything like that?
Well, just expound upon a little bit about the way because you asked about the 3 different time periods. So 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, and Frank may have mentioned this, and sorry, because I was trying to fumble about and get my mouse back online. But anyways, when we go through and do the inspections, each violation that we find, there's actually a severity rating related to it. And what happens is that we actually use a mathematical computation, so the number of violations that we see and the severity of those violations that then put a building into 3 different categories. So one would be compliant, the second would be at risk, and the third would be troubled. So the at risk properties get inspected every other year. There'll typically be an inspection from 25%, could be 100%. Usually it's around 25 to 50% for a at-risk building, and that would happen every other year. A troubled property is 100% and remains 100% every year until it qualifies or scores below the threshold that is set for a troubled property. And then finally, the compliant property that gets inspected once every 3 years. But it's all done very fairly. It's just all the code violations that are in our computer database already have a severity rating attached to it. The inspector sees that, they select the violation, and then it's computed at the end of the inspection. So that's how that process works.
Thank you, Keen, and thanks for all you do. We've got 3 more minutes, folks. There may be other burning questions, but I just want to thank all of our panelists. If you have any questions that were not addressed this evening, we will follow up. Email me, the Renters Alliance, at info@rentersalliance.org. I'll see that our staff or our board or one of the departments has an opportunity to address it if we can't address it quickly. But please get in contact with us. I want to make sure that we, again, thank our veterans on the eve of Veterans Day. I, too, am the son of a World War II veteran who's passed, but was wounded and served admirably. And we know that many renters out there are people who have served our country, and we thank them. I want to thank County Executive Mark Elrich for joining us. He was literally the man with multiple brains, working on the transportation and housing and several other issues, I'm sure, with a mighty task as county executive. So we thank him. We thank Dale Tibbetts for helping coordinate this, his special assistant and chief of staff. We thank Dr. Raymond Crowell. Dr. Crowell, would you like to add 30 seconds or less, a last word?
Thank you, Matt. I just want to say that I will not stop anyone from getting between. I don't want to stand between anyone and anything they have planned for the rest of the evening. But thank you all for having us out here and inviting us. I look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you, Dr. Crowell. And thank you to your team and Amanda Harris and all the people that work with you. We are here to be partners and like a family. We love you and we still fight with you, but we still love you. Thank you, Deputy Director Frank Demaray from the Housing and Community Affairs. Thank you, Keen Nichols, Supervisor from the Office of Code Enforcement. Thank you, as always, to our good friend Rosie McCray Moody, the Manager of the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs. Thanks to my board chair, William Roberts, and to our veteran and vice chair of our board, Chris Perry.
Go Michigan.
This town hall was, I missed that, but I'll go back and look at it. Our town hall is recorded. It is on YouTube. You can go back and research things. If you have a question or concern that wasn't addressed, please email us at info@rentersalliance.org. And with that, good night.